Welcome back to Chain of Thought, everyone. I'm Conor Bronsdon, Head of Developer Awareness at Galileo, and I'm here with Vikram Chatterji, co-founder and CEO at Galileo. Vikram, great to see you.
Likewise, Connor. Good to see you again.
It's been a lot of fun kicking off this show with you. And in the first couple episodes, we obviously focused on what's happening today in AI, with episode 1 talking a bit about regulation, the evolution of AI agents, how Ryder is winning with enterprises with May Habib. Congrats to them, by the way, on their just announced $200 million Series C, $1.9 billion valuation. Fantastic stuff. And then obviously key efforts from Google, Anthropic, and OpenAI within their AI technology and new products they're releasing. But today, you and I really want to focus on the future and look ahead to what we can expect from AI in 2025. And at our recent Productionize 2.0 conference with other AI leaders across the industry, we spoke with Sara Hooker, VP of Research at Cohere and Head of Cohere for AI, and Craig Wiley, Senior Director of Product for Mosaic AI at Databricks, about what their predictions about GenAI will look like in 2025 and what the future holds. And we'll share those conversations in the second half of this episode. But first, Vikram, I want to hear from you. What are you anticipating from AI in 2025?
Good question. And it's a good timely time to talk about this too, and that it's Q4. People are kind of reflecting on the whole year that's passed by and everything that's happened. And I feel like there's so much that has happened this year. Everyone thought that at the end of
Totally.
2023, and people have been even more surprised now at the end of 2024. And even for folks like me that have been in the industry looking at language models for the last decade, it's been such an exciting and exhilarating year to see all the advancements. It's also a good time to kind of piece the different points together to see where the trajectory is going. The way I see it, there are three different things that I'm excited about that I'm going to maybe position as predictions for the next year by the end of 2025. The first one is more at an ecosystem level. So in terms of, it's not just like the models, but everything else around it that makes AI click in the enterprise and for developers. At the ecosystem level, I'm very bullish still on open source models. We've been doing, as you know, the hallucination index from Galileo every couple of quarters. What we've been seeing through that is open source is catching up really fast. But my prediction is by the end of next year, there will be open source LLMs which will catch up with the best closed source models of today. So think like the Anthropic Claude models, which are super expensive. I don't even know who's going to use them, but it's very expensive, but large context window. I almost think of them as concept models, right? It's kind of like, here's the art of the possible. Some people can use them, but this is what you can do. But by the end of next year, I feel like there will be open source LLMs that'll catch up with that for fairly large context windows for a majority of tasks. And we look back at this year and say, like, wait a second, this is only possible if I paid an arm and a leg to actually make this available to me. But now I can just use this open source model and get it to where I need it to be, which is amazing and really good for the developer community. That's on the ecosystem level. I also think on the market level is a really interesting shift that's happened with AI, where the rules previously of how products are adopted have changed a lot, right? Like if you look at how mobile apps came around and the adoption was really great for some apps, like especially on the social and local side of things, like DoorDash and Facebook and WhatsApp. And they started to get crazy amount of revenue very quickly, but it still took them a while to get to, let's say, 100 million in revenue. Versus my prediction is you'll see a lot of these, what used to be called last year, wrapper apps, and people used to diss on them a lot. I think we'll see at least 5 to 10 of those applications reaching 100 million in revenue in ARR by the end of 2025. Some of them are already well on their way. So this is something I'm very excited about because it completely breaks the notion of how do you build a business. And I also think it's going to be really great for the developer community to come together and build more applications in the space. And the last one, the third one, is on the developer level. I feel like this year has been, again, a lot about understanding how do you actually trust the applications and how do you know that these applications can actually work really well at scale. And a large part of that is just evaluations. And we've heard from the community that evaluations are hard. That's because developers are being kind of like data scientists right now, where they have to experiment and figure out if it's actually ready to ship or not. And that takes a level of rigor that that software engineers are getting really quickly attuned to. So my prediction there at the developer level is by the end of next year, developers will align on best practices for AI system evaluations. And that's not going to be so much of a knowledge bottleneck anymore. It's just going to be a process bottleneck. which obviously tools like Galileo are here to help with and support. But I think that by the end of next year, it's going to be a very different place in terms of maturity for understanding how to evaluate and really monitor your systems at scale.
I totally agree. I think we're seeing that trend happen already with people talking about evaluation driven development and this conversation starting there. And more folks are looking to the evaluation intelligence layer at companies like Galileo to help solve and drive that. I mean, I think every conversation we have, we hear from folks saying, oh, well, we've seen early success. We need to fine tune our model now. We need to evaluate in production and pre production. Like, how do we make this work? It's pretty clear there's a major opportunity for the
Mhm.
industry to rapidly improve, particularly as we're seeing a bit of a slowdown in the size of these large LLMs as they kind of hit their maximum for the moment in training data and what they're actually able to do. It is giving open source a chance to catch up, and it is giving us all a chance to say, okay, how can we now fine tune this to work particularly well for specific needs? And that's where we're also seeing kind of SLMs have their day again, I
Yeah.
feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. But those are my predictions, Connor. I'm curious, what are your predictions for the coming year?
I don't know that I have anything revolutionary, or at least I'm not going to be the first one to say this, but I think 2025 is going to be the year of AI and nuclear energy. We've seen this trend kick off already here in 2024 with Microsoft's deal to reopen Three Mile Island Reactor 2, Amazon, Google, and others making strides on leveraging nuclear power, particularly for AI data centers. And I expect to see significant continued momentum on building nuclear to support additional AI data centers. We've seen major banks come together saying, hey, we're going to fund nuclear projects. We've seen advancements on micro reactors, and there's a clear signal from regulators that they're going to open up the opportunity to build more nuclear energy. And that's going to help with our base load broadly, but it's in particular going to drive our ability to create larger and more important models with this. So
Mhm.
I'm hopeful we'll see more reactors be updated and reactivated alongside continued investments in those micro reactors. And it's a huge opportunity to have the industry help move the power grid forward
Mhm.
while also solving for the future of AI workloads. And I think giving us this massive scaling opportunity.
I totally agree. That's going to be very exciting on all fronts.
And I also agree with you around this new class of AI builders is something that we've talked a lot about. I just think we're going to see this continued expansion of what it means to be someone in software and in AI. The capacity of Cursor, or even just using Claude or ChatGPT
Mhm.
to help you code, help you put together an app, let alone a presentation or something more basic. There is just a complete revolution happening where we are just now much more easily able to communicate with computers. There isn't this major barrier of, hey, you have to learn this new language. You can now come in and do at least basic stuff and increasingly more and more with natural language. I just see that along with the scaling opportunity from more energy, more data, more large models, and more small models that we just see coming throughout, whether that's open source or closed source. There is a new massive wave of people who are coming in saying, oh, well, let me just build something with this. It just shows the opportunity for the industry.
Absolutely. And I feel like this also gives the power to the back to the people in a very exciting way where I keep going back to mobile all the time because I was early in the world of Android in 2011, 2012 timeframe. And it was really exciting to see all the developers getting psyched about mobile, building out these apps for this form factor. With AI, it's slightly different because it's not really a new form factor which you're carrying in your pocket, but it's actually more interesting because it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. You can put
Yeah.
this into an app that you already have. You can also create net new products from the ground up. So it is much more ubiquitous. It is the barrier to entry is reducing a lot. Cost was, now that's reducing as well. And I think as a result of this, what starts to happen is people can get access to the ability to build even sooner. As an example, I was talking to some friends of mine where there's this friend who has a 10-year-old son, and for his 10th birthday, they asked him, like, what do you want for your birthday? Do you want, I don't know, they said something generic, like a PlayStation or something like that. But he actually asked for access to GPT Pro, and
Oh,
he wanted to know more about how you can build websites using GPT models. And that was interesting because for the parents, they were like, how do you even know about this? But for the child, he was like, that's what all my friends are doing because they're building out sites for their favorite characters. So if you think of it as like what are the kids of today trying to do, that kind of also points to where the future is going. It's just the barrier to entry in terms of building stuff is just reducing a lot more. It's just going to be super exciting. And which is why I feel like that the outcomes are also going to be pretty large in terms of actual revenue gain for businesses, for the actual operations gain for users. I also think this whole notion of what's the ROI of AI, which is a very enterprise problem right now, which a lot of people are grappling with, which is more of a level setting in terms of expectations for people, is also going to be something which we'll have smoothened out to some extent because of the amount of maturity that's going to come in terms of what can AI actually do versus what can't do just yet. So I'm excited about that. All of us collectively getting to a level of maturity with AI that doesn't quite exist yet.
Are there particular applications or types of applications that you think are going to have the most significant impact through AI in the next year or two?
Well, I feel like that's the beauty of it, right? Like when if you look back at machine learning, it typically we used to always talk about how, like even at Google, when we were trying to figure out where can we apply NLP, broad scope, that was the game plan at my team. And we started thinking about what are the repeatable tasks that people are doing over and over again, which is super manual today, where there's a lot of text data and with CV, there was a lot of image and video data and speech data. And given how pervasive unstructured data is, the list is really, really long of where people have to
Yeah.
just go through documents like one by one. Just think about it. Through your day, you're probably likely interacting with a bunch of people who are doing that. Like you go to your closest UPS or FedEx store, there are probably 10 people are doing something like that. And go to a supermarket, there's probably a person who's like looking at every single label and putting it in front of a machine. There's so many tasks which can be massively improved in terms of efficiency just using generative AI. So I'm just excited about in general people who are subject matter experts about the retail industry or the financial services industry, specific parts of the healthcare industry where there are massive inefficiencies, especially in the US, coming in and pairing up with a developer and just building something really exciting and interesting here. So the opportunities are really, really incredible. And I feel like some of these use cases that we can think of right now, we'll be actually very surprised by the end of next year in terms of how some of them have just become extremely ubiquitous and we've just started to get used to them around us. The here and now obviously are things like code generation, which is a massively saturated market. There are a lot of players out there that has emerged as a really good use case. There's also obviously other services like legal services and RPA that have come up as very obvious choices for Gen AI to be very influential in. As we know at Galileo, we have a lot of financial services customers and customers in telco where they're doing a lot of deep dives into where there are outages and using natural language to SQL use cases for that. So it's just been fascinating. All of this is in the last 6 to 8 months where these use cases have come up and just proliferated across these organizations. So in the next 12 to 14 months, there's going to be so much more that's going to happen.
Awesome. I love the optimism. I think it's a really exciting time to be in AI. And for folks who are listening and maybe are starting to get into this industry, maybe they're not full time yet, this is the time to jump in because there is a massive opportunity ahead for us. And you'll hear more about it shortly from Craig Wiley at Databricks and Sara Hooker at Cohere after the break. Vikram, thanks so much for coming on again.
Thanks for having me, Connor.
While you're listening, if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, do Vikram and I a quick favor, click on the show and select an option to rate the podcast 5 stars. Leave a little review if you're on Apple. We're so thankful to all of you who have already done so. We're already seeing a ton of interest on the podcast, and we can't wait to share the show with more AI builders around the world. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Craig Wiley from Databricks joining us alongside Yash Sheth, COO and co-founder of Galileo, for a conversation between the two of them about their predictions for AI in 2025.
Yeah, the whole idea of this session is to get your perspective, Craig, on how you and the Databricks team see the Gen AI space evolving and where it's headed. Let's dive into some of the revelations or learnings from 2024.
Yeah, the learnings have been good ones, right? I mean, if I look back to a year ago at this time, it seemed like the only topic was RAG. It was like, hey, can I rag this? Can I rag that? Can I rag the internet? Can I rag my company? Like, how can I rag everything, kind of, right? And then I think as we got into 2024, what folks found was that, prompt plus some docs doesn't equal a system that I can bet my company's reputation on. And so all of a sudden there was this massive influx of interest in how do I drive accuracy? And for, what we see in the market is that those systems that can actually be kind of run at production quality grade for, with real kind of ramifications if they get it wrong. Those systems are not kind of, hey, I've got a vector store and a prompt and it's good enough. Often these are multi-components, real compound or agentic systems that require kind of significant investment and significant tuning to make them really perform the way we would like to. And I think that learning of, hey, this is going to take more than just some embeddings and a prompt was really the one that I think has powered a lot of the product development and a lot of the enterprise energy over the last 6 to 12 months.
Right from 2023, when we were all building amazing, exciting POCs with GenAI, this year was definitely about where can we actually get the real ROI in production. And you alluded to that a little bit here, but what was off like from the beginning, and like what in terms of expectations, and also what like the hurdles that people have said like brought up to you?
I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the technology itself got in its own way for a little while there. And what I mean by that is, when GPT launched in November of 22, the data science community all kind of looked at it and was like, "Oh, they trained a giant transformer. That's pretty cool." Like, and they made it available. That's even cooler, kind of thing. The engineers, it seems like, and the software developers were looking at it kind of going like, I've been using GitHub Copilot, and that's legit. Who knows what this new API is going to allow me to start to achieve? But it was really the C-suite and the CEOs who all, I think, looked at each other and went, wait a minute. All we need to do to make computers do exactly what we want is tell them what to do. And so there was this moment of kind of max expectation of simplicity with very little knowledge of actually what it takes to get these things grounded and get these things, aware of all of the problems and to squeeze all the kind of entropy and hallucination out of the systems. And, and I think that took, a lot of us spent 23 watching startups show up out of nowhere with these great one-click, oh, you bring your text and with one click, I'll give you a RAG endpoint. And I think what I've been seeing this year is customers showing up with those one-click RAG POCs, kind of disappointed, looking, saying, hey, the demo when the vendor came to us was amazing. It was super easy to build, but it just doesn't do at scale and kind of broadly what I need it to do. And so helping companies start to try and wrap their arms around that problem and try and understand, hey, how well do you know your domain space? What does your golden data set look like? How are you doing evaluation? Are you using LLM judges? All these types of questions were questions that just weren't there a year ago when everybody thought this was going to be a one-click wonder of a technology. But instead, I think we all now know that while this technology will and continues to simplify abstractions for folks, actually building production quality AI systems that you're willing to bet your company's reputation on takes a lot of investment and a lot of hard work.
We've also been seeing how, beyond embeddings and prompts, there's been a lot of infrastructure that is being set up to take actions to generate the ROI that we expect from these agents and not just be that one click wonder. From that perspective, like where do you see the industry headed?
I think we're at a really interesting point. Kind of earlier this year, function calling started to really show up as a new capability. And I often, will talk to customers and you can almost kind of delineate a level of maturity on whether or not function calling is being used kind of aggressively. And with function calling, this idea of models using other tools or using other models and this kind of idea of agent interaction and things like this. I really think this is where we're starting to see some of the real innovation, because now all of a sudden I can take this hard, hey, my model is performing well, except it's not performing well over here in this space. Well, what if I were to deploy a couple of tools, specialized tools for that space? And now all of a sudden, instead of my model kind of naively going over there trying to figure out what the right answer is, now there's a couple of kind of purpose-built, capabilities for it to go utilize in this area of kind of high entropy or of challenging kind of topical or domain space. And so, that's, I think, the piece that I'm really excited about is seeing how folks are able to start stringing these pieces together and really to start seeing these models and agents get a lot smaller. And what I mean by smaller, not only, hey, does size make serving these things smaller, but if this bot I'm building or this agent I'm building, if it had a very, very narrow set of capabilities that I'm actually asking of it, I can tune that much more effectively than a very large one. And then I can maybe orchestrate it as part of a bigger bunch, as opposed to trying to, boil the ocean with one single kind of, my company GPT.com or something like that. Right. And so this idea of kind of tools and increasingly agent interaction is one where I really think we're going to see a lot of performance improvement as we come into the new year.
So prediction one, 2025 is going to be an era of toolification, seems like.
Fingers crossed. I hope so, because right now it does feel like one of the most promising capabilities for really driving kind of a stepwise improvement in the accuracy of these systems.
Exactly. And I think going from that, like it seems like the smart thing to do is to be specific about the use cases, go deeper into specific use cases versus building something very broad. And to that effect, would love to get your thoughts on how teams are rethinking the scope and keeping that kind of focus in place.
The idea of this focus, or this idea of, in a much narrower sense, is where we're seeing a lot of the value come from for organizations. If I sit there and say like, hey, my objective with this endpoint or with this model or chatbot or what have you is to kind of cover this massively broad area, then things like developing evaluation schemas and developing kind of my own ability to understand that domain, parse that domain, and break it down really starts to become the headwind in many cases, right? Whereas if this is an area that is somewhat tractable, if this is a domain, hey, maybe I do want to build that customer service chatbot, but I'm going to limit it to, my order and delivery pipeline this time. And then the next time I'm going to have it focus on product specifications and product challenges, and kind of break these different silos of both data, customer need, and usage, and really, instead of trying to kind of build one chatbot to rule them all, instead maybe having something focused on, hey, how do I respond to customers who have questions about supply chain versus how do I respond to customers who have questions about product performance or product capabilities or troubleshooting. And I think as we start to see folks naturally start to break some of these things up and start to attack them a bit more kind of in a bit more of a targeted way, I think we'll be able to see evaluation and a lot of the kinds of the challenges that come with this become something that folks are just more, it's easier to approach, and it gets a little bit easier to start putting wins on the board all of a sudden when you're able to kind of build and deliver that thing at a really high quality, as opposed to kind of having the giant bot that underwhelms across a series of use cases, if you will.
Speaking of use cases, right? Like I think what I've been seeing across our customers is like actually a lot of the use cases can have multimodal aspects to them in some ways. What are your thoughts there? What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, multimodal, man, oh man, it was exciting. I was really excited to see the new Llama models launch. Clearly, multimodal is coming, but I think, when we all think about, or at least when I think about multimodal, I'm thinking about video gen and video understanding and live chat, like live voice chat and all of these kinds of things, where the modality is a real luxury to get to think about these modalities. But to be perfectly honest, collectively, we're not parsing PDFs all that well. Like it would be one thing if this modality were like, hey, I can take in all senses at all points in time and kind of fully understand them. But to be perfectly honest, I'd be really excited if insurance companies could parse claims docs successfully, right? And helping companies start to try and understand, hey, how do I start, I've been able to extract all this text. I have these tables or these images. Not only how do I interact with them and how do I parse them and chunk them and what have you, but how do I make sense of them within my system? Do I describe them and then treat them as text? Do I use a multimodal system, and what are the benefits of that? And I think, today, the cost of multimodal is still high enough that unless you need it, it's probably not the right direction. But, I think as this technology continues to get faster and cheaper, as the next gen of hardware comes through, I'm really excited to see whether or not we're going to be able to move to, you know, it's funny with LLMs. I was talking to a data scientist recently who said, my challenge with LLMs is that the folks building it, all of it are sloppy. They just pour all the data in. And there is some for a classic kind of machine learning scientist, yeah, it might feel funny to just pour in, all the text we have into this model or something like that, the way folks often find can be valuable. And I think in that regard, getting to a place where we could do that for multimodal would be super exciting. But to be honest, as far as 2025 goes, my hope is that we exit 2025 with a human understanding of PDFs, to be perfectly
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah, there's just so many use cases that have PDF manuals and books and illustrations that we're not parsing all the knowledge from charts and graphs. And even if I like scan a newspaper, like a literally printed newspaper, and give it to the LLM, there are certain visual components of that don't get caught.
And it's those times when the interaction of the text and the visual, when the text is discussing the visual and the visual is discussing the text and back and forth, that I think it becomes a requirement that we start to figure this out more effectively.
And lastly, Craig, what about governance and thinking of trustworthiness when it comes to, and a lot of what we've talked about is in service of getting the entire GenAI system to operate accurately and reliably, reducing scope, thinking about toolification, function calling, some of the challenges with multimodal. I think it all boils down to us running an accurate and trustworthy system in production.
This is an area where obviously Databricks, takes a really opinionated stance on governance. I really think that, as these technologies continue to increase and continue to get more and more data hungry, the requirement to understand the flows of data that you have and the lineage and kind of the DAG of data traveling through your own usage patterns, as well as the systems you're building, and the ability to really govern that, right? The ability to ensure that, hey, whoever's asking this question of my system, am I able to confidently say that, hey, they have access or they have permission to view any of the training data that went into this system and any of the data that I'm injecting through the prompt. And, that is, maybe it's really straightforward if this is a public endpoint, but if this is an internal endpoint that seeks to talk about HR challenges or seeks to, dive into my Jira tickets or something like that, ensuring that governance is met at every step. And I say it may be easier looking externally, but certainly we've seen plenty of leakages without GenAI externally. And so, being able to have just an extraordinarily high degree of confidence, here's the deal, like legislation and compliance is coming. And the more and more impressive and exciting this technology gets, the more and more likely that compliance is going to come and have a giant impact. And so ensuring that you're ready for that, hey, what data am I consuming? Where is that data coming from? How am I consuming it? And being able to really kind of reflect that back for each system and even each prompt that each system responds with is going to be a requirement as we move forward in time, as opposed to maybe the luxury it's been in the past.
Awesome. Really quick, I know we're a few minutes over, but Craig, I want to end this amazing discussion with one hot take from you. Is at the end of 2025, if you were to wave a magic wand, what would you want to happen?
Yeah, I mean, other than PDFs, that's a good one, right? No, I mean, here's the deal. I met with a group of banks recently and I asked them, hey, how many of you have GenAI capabilities in production? And they all raised their hand. And I said, how many of you have more than one? And almost all of them raised their hand. And I said, how many of them are ROI positive? And all of their hands went down. And this is something we've got to help the industry succeed at. And, I'm super impressed with the work that Galileo is doing. It's, whenever I have folks who are concerned about the performance of their systems in production, I often will have them call you guys, because I think there are a few companies better positioned to be able to help companies with some of those challenges. And really, I think really excited about the partnership we continue to have, but really As I look forward, I think I'm looking forward to that moment next year when I can look out at a group of banks or a group of other enterprises and say, hey, how much are you making because of Gen AI? How is Gen AI contributing to your positively contributing to your bottom line? And I'm really excited about us starting to see that set of use cases come through next year.
Amazing. That's a great way to end this. And thanks for the partnership as well, Greg. And it's, I hope together we can make a difference and make that a reality next year.
Absolutely. Thanks again, and congrats to all the folks watching. You've chosen a extraordinarily relevant meeting to stay tuned to. Have a great day. Thanks, Yash.
Next up, you'll hear from Sara Hooker at Cohere about what she expects to see out of AI in 2025.
I'm really happy to invite Sara today, and thanks for coming, Sara.
It's such a pleasure to be here. So really looking forward to this chat.
Amazing. So the exciting topic we have today is predictions for 2025. When it comes to generative AI, this space is moving so rapidly. So open it up to you.
I would say for 2025, there's a few things. I think that the realm of optimization is going to expand. So you can optimize in the data space, you can dynamically change your data pools, the algorithm, but also tooling is going to become more pronounced. But I think people have very difficult time evaluating
Yep.
the caliber of tooling. When we talk about tooling, it means different things to different people. And to be honest, a lot of the time you're bumping into the infrastructure of the internet. So it's really unclear how you evaluate when everything feels very tied to the specificity of like a given API. And so that's wide open. How do you actually evaluate if these algorithms are doing a good job? I think multimodal is going to be crucial. A few questions there. It's just that how do you understand if the model's uncertain, if there's multiple different modalities? This is important from a safety perspective.
Mhm.
But we struggle with it with individual domains, and multimodal compounds the complexity of it. So what I think we'll see there is like very interesting work trying to get at, in many ways, the core question, which is for us as humans, having multiple inputs, audio, visual, motion, actually helps us calibrate uncertainty, because for a given second of inputs, we can understand, does this match or is something off?
Mhm.
And I think we're going to see really interesting work there trying to do the same for our algorithms. And for me, for someone who works a lot on safety, I think that's very interesting as a direction.
Well, how do you think the work we're doing with adaptation of these models now is going to help unlock some big progress in the multimodal space and even the tooling space, right? Like as we were talking about before with Craig as well, that as all of these, I would say, capabilities of the LLMs are enhanced with tools, and there are so many different tools that are used by agents to actually do mission critical work. The ability of these models to adapt to diverse APIs or multimodal content, like just a PDF of a diagram with a table, and the model able to understand that. Well, what do you think we need to do now to be able to unlock these capabilities next year?
Yeah, I would say so. With the tooling, I think people underestimate this. So tooling is often thought of as a pure research question. How do you enable tooling? But the reality is you are bumping into every API is being designed in a different way. So what that means is you're either going to have to get much better on the fly exploration. So how do you figure out how the API differs? How do you automatically adjust? Which is traditionally something our algorithms are not as good at, or you're going to have to pick and choose your tools and saturate the data space. Both of these are interesting possibilities, but I think the real question is that's more fun to think about is who innovates with a mixture of both? Like who's able to gain enough data from some tools to an exploration strategy for others? And it's not a trivial problem. And so I actually think while tooling will continue to dominate over the next year, I suspect like if we find ourselves here next year catching up, I think that we'll still see some tools being kind of used quite well because people have just saturated the data space. But in terms of making things work for your tool for a given business, I think that it's a formidable challenge and it needs that exploration piece to work.
Yeah, one last thing about 2025, right? Like a lot of your focus is on safety and regulations aside. I think what are some of the regulations that in my opinion. But on the fundamental like science of these LLMs and safety of these LLMs, what are some of the breakthroughs that you're hoping for in 2025?
One aspect of research that we've done a lot of work on that I think is very interesting is how do you optimize for multiple objectives? Because safety is very interesting, right? Because at any one time, safety is both global. There's some concepts that typically there's consensus on across regions, like no violence generated, or really strict guidelines around sexual and CSAM content. And these are typically agreed on and very universal wherever you operate. But then there's also specificity of local harms. And so this is a very important technical challenge. How do you align a model to both your global, but also your local alignment? And to do this in a way in which you're flexible and you can adapt a model to each domain separately at each jurisdiction. And so a lot of what we've been doing around this area is preference alignment, which is really this gold dust that happens at the end of training where you're steering your model. And how do you do that according to a multiple objective? I think this is very important and it's kind of a very crucial building block from actually creating models which can be used in many different settings.
We've been thinking about, having better preference models, even as a mode of observability, or even as a
Mhm.
mode of if we designed a system or if we deployed a system to do X, Y, and Z, three different objectives, are we aligning to those objectives? Which is, one some of the baby steps we've taken are like metrics and algorithms called instruction adherence. Like, if people are giving clear instructions from their objectives to the LLM that this is what I expect to see, but is the output actually adhering to those? I mean, this just baby steps here, but totally resonate with the direction of like adapting the model from a preference alignments perspective seems like a very exciting space.
Yeah, and this is also very crucial what you're describing, which is let's say you align on a set of preferences and you're tailoring them. You want to know, can you then track progress against your new set of objectives? So it's super important. It's actually critical. It's part of the same problem space.
Awesome. So we made three predictions, but now let's get on to the hot takes. If there was like one thing that, like, being fortune tellers right now, a year from now, what would be one big thing that you would want to see?
I think we're going to see dual trends. I think models are going to get bigger,
Mhm.
and this is mainly for multimodal. I think people are going to push out the boat and see how far they can go. But I also think models are going to get a lot smaller as we better leverage optimization in a broader way. So optimization, the inference space, and also data kind of optimization where we kind of stratify our data set. And so that's pretty exciting. I do a lot of work on efficiency at scale. And so for me, it's super interesting to think about how we do more with less. And what's your hot take? You can't get away with that.
Well, bringing up the cuff, I think one of the biggest bottlenecks I've seen in I deeply care about teams being able to adopt this technology for every single use case, and I love the idea of adaptation and
Mhm.
this for these LLMs. But I think one of the big things, if you look at what every business is thinking about, is like, oh, there were a lot of POCs last year. We've been trying to productionize a lot of these this year, but it's been taking much longer than we expected to. Next year, I would want there to be a world where every AI developer knows exactly what they need to do to leverage this technology confidently. And this is intentionally high level, but because there are few different aspects to it. But really, in a minute, it's basically a combination of having the right trust layer, having the right regulations, and having the right foundational capabilities of these models to adapt. And the three in combination will give us a much better framework and accelerate adoption of Gen AI in the world.
Yeah, I do fundamentally believe that adaptability and also the ability for, I think one of the things I see is how do end stakeholders quickly shape and provide feedback to guide and align some of these models and efficiently. So it doesn't take much time. I think this is one of the most fun problems to work on.
Amazing. So excited, so happy to speak to you. This was an amazing conversation. Thanks a lot, Sarah.
Make sure to subscribe to Chain of Thought wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to check out Galileo's YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the podcast as well as events like Productionize. And don't forget to connect with us on Twitter or LinkedIn at Run Galileo, or find Vikram there as well. He has a lot of interesting things to say. So let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you about the show, and we'll see you next week.